The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show. I am, of course, not David Pakman. I am Benjamin Dixon, host of the podcast, The Benjamin Dixon Show. You can find me anywhere you find podcasts. David is out of town, and he will be back tomorrow. And in the meantime, we have a lot of news to cover. Of course, we have to begin the day with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, who has once again inserted himself into the legal process surrounding the Mueller probe. I want to bring up a tweet that the president shared early this morning, and this is what he had to say. He said, "This is a terrible situation, and Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now before it continues to stain our country any further. Bob Mueller is totally conflicted, and his 17 angry Democrats that are doing his dirty work are a disgrace to the United States." That's how he started. He continued with the next tweet. This is what he had to say. He said, "Paul Manafort worked for Ronald Reagan, Bob Dole, and many other highly prominent and respected political leaders. He worked for me for a very short time. Why didn't the government tell me that he was under investigation? These old charges have nothing to do with collusion, a hoax." All right, we'll stop right there with those two tweets. So the president has already, he's done this before. He's inserted himself into the process, but this is the first time that he's directly called for Attorney General Jeff Sessions to put an end to this. You will recall last week and the week before that, Republicans started the process of impeaching Rod Rosenstein because of this investigation. And the president is getting nervous. If you see his behavior patterns, if you see what he's doing, he's making the mistakes. And it's very likely that he is going to implicate himself with his actions at this point. It's the saying, the saying that it's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover up. And that's what the president is doing here. Now, he's, of course, labeling it a witch hunt. That's what he does. He labels everything a hoax. Anything that he disagrees with is considered a hoax. But this is, like I said before, this is the first time that he has outright called for Jeff Sessions to put an end to this. Thankfully, Jeff Sessions doesn't have the ability to put an end to this because he has recused himself from this process. But underneath all of this is what the president is actually trying to do. He's trying to win this in the court of public opinion. He knows that if he can make this issue as hyperpartisan as possible, then it's very likely that nothing will be done, even if Mueller turns up something sensitive, something that implicates him. Now, as it stands right now, there's not a lot of evidence that we've been privy to publicly that implicates the president directly. I think the closest thing we have now is Donald Trump Jr., where it's come out that the president knew about the meeting with Russian operatives at Trump Tower. Previously, Trump Jr. told the Congress that the president did not know about it. And so the highest level of ramifications so far really rests with Donald Trump Jr. and the possibility of perjury. But that still hasn't stopped the president of the United States from being bold enough and brash enough to insert himself in the process in a very direct fashion. This lets you know that we're way past. We're so far beyond any standardized norms, any sense of protocol, any concern for the appearance of letting justice carry its way out. We're well past that point. At this point, it's a free for all, and the president has decided to wage his war against Bob Mueller and the Department of Justice, his Department of Justice. And before I even finish that sentence, we have to point this out, right? The irony. The biggest irony in all of this is that this is Bob Mueller, who is a Republican, Rod Rosenstein, who is a Republican, or at least was appointed by Republicans. You have a Republican Department of Justice headed up by a Republican Attorney General who was appointed by a Republican president, and they are waging a war against their own, but they're swearing that this is all a result of the Democratic Party. I want to bring up the last tweet from Donald Trump this morning on the issue. He said, "Russian collusion with the Trump campaign, one of the most successful in history, is a total hoax. The Democrats paid for the phony and discredited dossier, which was, along with Comey, McCabe, Stokes, and his lover, the lovely Lisa Page, used to begin the witch hunt. Disgraceful. It's a little difficult reading the president of the United States because of the absurd things that he says. But the fact of the matter is that he's still spreading himself fake news. The dossier, the origins of the dossier goes back to a Republican operative that was trying to do research on opposition research on Donald Trump. That's been proven, but that doesn't stop the president of the United States from spreading his own fake news, from doing everything that he can to muddy the waters because he knows this thing to be true. He knows that people who love him and still support him, no matter what he's done so far, they don't care about the truth. They don't care that the dossier actually had origins in the Republican Party. They are going to continue to say the same lie that it started with Hillary Clinton and started with Democrats. They're going to continue to push that because the president of the United States continues to push that same lie. So here we are with stories that in any other administration would be enough to bring that administration to a complete gridlock. But this is the unique strength of Donald Trump. This is the unique ability, his uncanny gift. If he's talented in anything, it's not being a businessman, it's not being a leader, it's his unfettered shamelessness, his ability to go further and further and further to destroy any sense of shame that this country has. And we are not even in a position to actually process this. We're dealing with the president who throws so many different ridiculous situations at us in a single news cycle that we can't even really adjust to consider how significant what just happened really is. I mean, there've been news cycles where in one day we have 5 stories that in any other administration would have brought that administration down. But for Donald Trump, it's just the 12 o'clock news break. And that's his uncanny gift. And this is why when everyone was saying, I don't know if you recall earlier in the administration, people kept tweeting and kept saying, this can't be the new normal. This isn't the new normal. The reality of it is that this is the new normal because we have all gotten adjusted to it. We've all gotten accustomed to the president of the United States being involved in any number of scandals that would have brought down any administration. I don't care, Democrat or Republican. What the president of the United States is mired in right now was enough to bring down any previous administration. And yet he just keeps trudging through his own swamp that he's supposed to be emptying out. This next story has a lot of twists and turns. So I ask that you stay with me on it. Facebook announced on yesterday that they have pulled down approximately 32 campaigns that they consider to be inauthentic. Now, before I go any further, let's first talk about this word inauthentic, because Facebook in their press release, they never defined inauthentic, nor did they define their methodology of determining what was inauthentic or not. Now, to be sure, we do have to be concerned with quote unquote Russian meddling or any other meddling that occurs from a foreign nation in our campaign, right? In our 2018 election cycle, Russians got involved in the 2016 election cycle. At this point, anyone who doesn't admit that is being absurd and ridiculous. But if we just throw a blanket statement out there and say Facebook, and they have the arbitrary right, they have the right to just determine arbitrarily what is inauthentic or not without disclosing to the public their process and their methodology, that gives Facebook the ability to just blanket pull down anything that they want. Now, on any normal day, you will have conservatives making that argument that I just made because it's the truth. But you're not going to see people like Ben Shapiro, Sam Harris, and all of the free speech absolutists on the right talking about this in context of Facebook today, because Facebook pulled down a majority of left-leaning campaigns. Let's pull up a couple on the screen at this point. This is the first one from Resistors. History has shown that fascism must be stopped before it becomes too late. There was a Trump Nightmare Must End event scheduled for the November 4th. They pulled down this. They pulled down the next one, also from the Resistors, talking about Columbus Day, saying that millions of indigenous people died during the conquest of America. History is history. But if we want integrity and equality, we have to erase these bloody memories and start over. Congratulations to LA. Speaking of LA, bringing down a Christopher Columbus statue. This last one is probably the most disturbing to me. This was an anti-fascism protest scheduled for August 10th through August 12th in Washington, D.C. to push back and to counter-protest against the Unite the Right rally that's scheduled in D.C. This is the second Unite the Right rally. The first one, if you recall, was back in Charlottesville a year ago when Heather Heyer was killed by Nazis. So these are the three campaigns that Facebook pulled down. And Facebook did not give any kind of indication in terms of their methodology of determining what was inauthentic and even a definition for the word inauthentic. And that's problematic because everything that they pulled down was left leaning. Everything that they pulled down was something that was counteracting the Donald Trump's administration, fascism in general, the Unite the Right rally in specific. And so they've made a blanket statement on left-leaning operations and said that they are inauthentic. And we're not going to hear a single word about this and from a free speech absolutist perspective that you would hear from anybody on the right. That's the hypocrisy that we see all of the time, but we still have to point this out. So long as the government or so long as corporations are operating in favor of conservatism, conservatives don't really care that is violating free speech as they define it, even though it's not a true violation of the First Amendment. But I digress. The point is that here we are with Facebook making these judgment calls without disclosing to the public what they are using or as a form of methodology or what are they using as a definition of inauthentic. And the organizers for the counter protest to the Unite the Right rally 2 have come out and they said that this is a legitimate rally. This was something that they planned. They are actually anti-fascist, and they are actually trying to go and protest against fascists who are marching in front of the White House. But Facebook has labeled them as inauthentic and have sent messages to the 600 people who replied saying that they were going to participate, saying that this was an inauthentic campaign and not something that they should attend. Now, again, let me reiterate, there has been meddling in our election. There continues to be meddling in our political process, but it exists in many forms. And before I move to this next point, I want to pull up this first quote from Facebook because I think it's important. Today, we removed 32 pages and accounts from Facebook and Instagram because they were involved in coordinated inauthentic behavior. No definition thereof. This kind of behavior is not allowed on Facebook because we don't want people or organizations creating networks or of accounts to mislead others about who they are or what they are doing. Let's go to the next quote. This is what they said. We are still in the very early stages of our investigation and don't have all of the facts. That's it. I don't even want to read anymore. I don't want to read anymore because you don't have all the facts and you haven't revealed your processes to the public. Mind you, this is something that you should have done in 2016, but you didn't do to the benefit of Donald Trump. But now you're doing it again. Now you're doing this to the benefit of Donald Trump. Let me say that again, because it's like a bit of irony. In 2016, Facebook did not participate in pulling down things inauthentic, and it benefited Donald Trump. But now they're pulling down things without telling us, disclosing any type of methodology, without giving us even the definition of inauthentic. And what they're pulling down is to the benefit of Donald Trump. But I digress. Here's a campaign that we know is fake. The walk away campaign. Hashtag walk away. It is a campaign that's coordinated by conservatives to make it look as though people, progressives, and particularly black people are leaving the Democratic Party. This campaign is so fake and so large that it got all the way to the steps of the Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas's wife, I believe her name is Niecy Thomas. I forgot her first name, but she shared images that are fake images of black people who said that they've left the Democratic Party. This is an intentional campaign used to encourage self-disenfranchisement. Let me say that again. This is a specific campaign coordinated by conservatives to ensure that black people self-disenfranchise by saying, oh, well, I can't really be a Republican, but I'm not going to support the Democrats anymore, so I'm just going to stay home. A net win for conservatism. Also, this campaign it has come out that this campaign is being promoted by Twitter accounts, 600 Twitter accounts that have connections and ties directly to Russia. We don't know if it's the Russian government, but we know these accounts have their origins in Russia. They have been promoting the hashtag walk away. Now, combine the coordinated effort by Russians to make this campaign or to promote this campaign, and with the fact that they are spreading fake images of black people trying to encourage self-disenfranchisement, this is exactly the type of inauthentic campaign that Facebook should be pushing. But if you go to Clarence Thomas's wife's Facebook page right now, you'll see these images. Pull them up on your screen now. I walked away from the Democrats. Because when did it become acceptable to encourage the assassination of the president? Nobody's encouraged that. Call for the physical assault of the president? Nobody has encouraged that. Demand, and before I even finish reading it, this picture, she looks like such a sincere black woman. This is a stock photo. This is a stock image, and it's been proven that this is not a real person. Let's go to the next one. This is a meme of the New Jersey governor talking about sending illegal immigrants to college for free, which is taken out of context. And underneath it, you have this black guy who looks very seriously in deep thought. And he said, quote, "My wife and I both work full time and still cannot afford to send our own kids to college. What is wrong with this picture? Hashtag walk away." This guy is also from a stock photo. So Facebook, if you want to really be concerned about inauthentic and coordinated campaigns with possible ties to Russia, while you're pulling down real campaigns of left-leaning organizations who are fighting against fascism, you should take a look at the wife of the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and the Walk Away campaign, which is using fake images, fake stock images of black people and being promoted by accounts with direct ties to Russia. But those images have been up for over a week now, and here Facebook is worried about the anti-fascist rally in Washington, D.C. next week.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am, of course, not David Pakman. I am Benjamin Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show. You can find my podcast everywhere, so be sure to check it out. David will be back tomorrow. Let's talk about the President of the United States. And I don't want to say it's an unwitting occurrence. I think he knows what he's doing. But he has a way of ensuring that his audience has absolutely no grip on reality whatsoever. And he can do it all in one sentence, and no one pays any attention to it. What the hell am I talking about? I'm talking about the President of the United States. In a single sentence, he says polls are fake. And then just maybe 2 seconds later, he uses a poll to justify why he's the most popular Republican president in history. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the president yourself.
Poll, they're called suppression polls. You know, polls are fake just like everything else. If the fake news did a poll, it would show that I'm only getting 25% with the 401k people, even though they're up 44%. No, we're doing well. We're doing well, and I'm happy you're doing well. They just came out with a poll. Did you hear? The most popular person in the history of the Republican Party is Trump. Can you believe that?
I don't know what to do with this. They are literally cheering the fact that the President of the United States just told them the polls are fake, right? So if the polls are fake, doesn't it just make sense? Doesn't it logically follow that the poll that he's now saying is a good poll is also fake? But what the president has an uncanny knack of doing is saying anything that I disagree with, anything that's not flattering, anything that doesn't support me is fake. But if it supports me, it's real. And this is the premise that has spread through the Republican Party. Like, this is, people want to consider leftists and progressives and Democrats as having the Trump derangement syndrome. But I think that there's really a true Trump derangement syndrome. And that is from people who reject any information that is non-flattering, unflattering, any information that they disagree with regard to Trump, and accepting that same information from the same source if they like what it's saying. And this is what the president does. He encourages this, and the people follow it. And I want to play a clip from last week. Everybody remembers this clip from last week when he basically told them, don't believe your eyes, don't believe your ears. Take a listen in.
But it's all working out. And just remember, what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening.
This is directly from 1984, right? The most essential rule, the most essential command from Big Brother was that you reject what your eyes and ears were seeing. This doesn't bother conservatives. This doesn't make them uncomfortable. Like, here's a difference. People want to draw equivalences between Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and progressives all the time. But the reality of it is that on the left, we will call you out for your BS. We don't care who you are. We don't care if you are President Barack Obama or if you're President Donald Trump. If you come to us with something that is obscenely, logically inconsistent, so much so that you contradict yourself in a single sentence, we're going to call you out on it without question. But Republicans, like sheep to the slaughter, they line up and they eat this stuff. They eat it up. They gobble it up because it confirms their biases. Yes. But more than anything else, it just overinflates their sense of success in this Trump administration. They have to always win. Donald Trump promised them that they are going to be winning so much. So the only way that they can continue to win is if they reject anything that says that they're not winning. Let's forget about the fact that North Korea is still expanding their weapons, their arsenal, their nuclear arsenal, because Donald Trump said that North Korea was getting rid of them. So reject the evidence. Let's accept what Donald Trump says. Forget the fact that the economy actually performed better underneath President Obama in several quarters. Donald Trump said that the economy is performing better than it's ever performed in the history of ever performing. So they accept that. And that's the only way that they can actually go through this era of Trump and not have their brains explode from the logical inconsistencies, from the cognitive dissonance that occurs simply by supporting someone like Donald Trump. And the fact of the matter is, you're not going to always win. I don't even believe I have to say this. Like, I'm ashamed that I even have to say this. Donald Trump is not going to be perfect. In fact, in so many ways, he's already screwed up. But if you're going to look for your leader to always be triumphant no matter what, then you are going to find yourself in a position that conservatives are currently in, where they consistently reject reality in order to promote this idea that they are always winning. Congratulations, Republicans. You played yourself. Speaking of absurdities, there is a segment of the American population that is absolutely okay with Russian involvement in our campaigns. There's a study that came out from the Yahoo Finance Survey Monkey Poll, and I want to pull that quote up on your screen so that I can just give it to you in their own words. A Yahoo Finance Survey Monkey Poll released Tuesday finds that 11% of Republicans or GOP-leaning Americans surveyed said that it is appropriate, that's right, appropriate for Russia to try to help Republicans, while 29% said that it's not appropriate, but it wouldn't be a big deal. So about 40% of Republicans have no problem whatsoever. It might be significant, but it's not a big deal. It might be an issue or not appropriate, but it's not a big deal. 40% of Republicans are okay with Russians involving themselves in our elections. Now, and when I say Russians involving themselves in our elections, I don't mean this overly simplified communist Red Scare that's going on in some in Democratic circles. I'm talking about Russians literally involving themselves and possibly turning the results of an election in favor of someone who is a fascist-leaning, aspiring dictator. And you have Republicans who say, nah, it's no big deal. No big deal. As shocking as that is, this next slide, this next quote is a little more shocking to me. Pull it up on the screen. It says this: on the Democratic side, 14% of Democrats said it would either be appropriate or wouldn't be a big deal for Russia to intervene. 86% called it not appropriate and major for Russians to try to help Democrats. Now, mind you, 86% is a huge, overwhelming majority. But I'm sorry, who the hell are these 14% of Democrats who say that it's no big deal or appropriate for Russia to involve themselves in our elections? This makes no sense to me. I really want to know who these Democrats are. Like, where do you, not only where do you live, but who are you? What do you actually stand for? What do you even care about? If you don't care about a foreign nation flipping our elections, possibly flipping our elections, what do you even care about? I mean, I'm not even sure if these people actually exist. Maybe that's a statistical error. I don't know. But the point is that somewhere in this country, and particularly in the conservative circles, there's a large group of people who see absolutely nothing wrong with Russia. And here's the reality underneath it. The reality underneath it is that they don't care because it gave them Donald Trump, potentially. the investigation is still ongoing. You can make that call for yourself. But they don't care because it worked out in their favor. And that shows you the extent of the hyperpartisanship that exists in this country. That they have no qualm whatsoever with a foreign government potentially involving themselves in our election process, so much so that they could have given us Donald Trump. They don't care so long as their side won. That shows you that their allegiance is not to the United States of America. All these overtures of patriotism, all these overtures of you better stand for the flag, NFL players, all of their concerns about, the red, white, and blue and respecting our country and respecting our veterans. But when it comes down to it, they are more concerned with their party than any sense of nationalism, any sense of patriotism. They are more committed to their political party. In other words, let me flip the statement. In other words, they're willing to betray this country in order to maintain political power. So when it comes down to this whole question of who loves America more, which is a ridiculous question in the first place, but let's operate within that premise. Let's operate within that framework. Who loves the country more? People who have no concern about a foreign government involving themselves in our election? Or people who take a knee during the pledge in order to protest systemic violence against black people in this country? Who loves this country more? I don't even have to finish the question because you already know the answer.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am, of course, not David Pakman. David will be back tomorrow. He's traveling today. I'm Benjamin Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show. But you already knew that if you've been listening and watching the show so far. So let's just jump right into it. One thing that the Republican Party has been shamelessly doing is rejecting any institutional norms that they otherwise would observe. And that's a whole lot of words to basically say that they're bending the rules in their favor, even when they use the rules in their favor. Right. This is what they're doing. And for the first time in history, the records for a Supreme Court justice that are to be released, to be reviewed by senators so that they can make their decision on this nominee, rather. These records are being filtered through by a Republican operative instead of the National Archives. Brett Kavanaugh is now being protected by a Republican attorney who is an operative. Instead of all of his records being released, they are releasing a specific set of records during a very narrow time frame of his service, his previous service. I want to bring up an article, a quote for you now. This is from the New Republic. Chuck Grassley, the Iowa Republican senator who chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee, sent a letter notifying Minority Leader Chuck Schumer last week that he was, quote, not going to put American taxpayers on the hook by seeking Kavanaugh's records from his time as Bush's staff secretary. He will still request records from Kavanaugh served as in the White House counsel's office. It's unlikely that those records, Grassley wrote, would provide any meaningful insight into how Kavanaugh would perform his judicial duties if confirmed to the Supreme Court. Now, I mean, at face value, that is absurd. First of all, he's saying that we're not going to put American taxpayers on the hook. Listen, we could spend money on everything else. We just gave a $1.5 trillion giveaway, a $1 trillion giveaway to the wealthiest people in the country. I'm sure that we can afford a few $1,000,000 to make sure that we get all of the records for this nominee so that we can examine everything that he did, particularly in a time that's most significant to American history. We are literally engaged in wars right now, 2 presidents later, that were initiated during Kavanaugh's time, right? So we need time serving for the president. So we need to see these records. We need to see what he believed, what he said, how he explained things. And it goes beyond that. So the excuse is the excuse that we won't put America's taxpayer dollars on the hook is patently absurd. But then the second part, that it doesn't tell us anything meaningful about how he was served, is also patently ridiculous. But again, like I said at the beginning of the segment, Republicans have absolutely no problem rejecting institutional norms that they otherwise would use in their favor. Let's go to the next quote so we can deepen this a little more. This is from Senate Majority Leader And this is what he said, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. He said the Republican majority has cast aside Democratic wishes for openness and transparency and has made a partisan request for only a small subset of George Kavanaugh's records. It is such a break from precedent that you have to wonder, what are Republicans hiding about Judge Kavanaugh's records? And that's the only thing that you can conclude, is that Republicans are hiding something. Of course they're hiding something. Look at the time frame that they're hiding it from. Let's go to the next quote, because this really just puts it all together. This is what they're hiding. Actually, this is the quote from the New Republic. There doesn't appear to be any reasonable justification to keep those documents out of the public's eyes before Kavanaugh's confirmation vote, other than the concerns that you might find something that could prevent it. The next quote is the one that I want right here. As staff secretary from 2003 to 2006, Kavanaugh would have been well placed to weigh in on some of the Bush administration's most significant moments, including the Iraq War and its aftermath, the Abu Ghraib scandal, and other torture-related policies, the reauthorization of the Patriot Act, the federal partial birth abortion ban, and more, according to the New Republic. These are critical issues. This is not just a way of slowing down the process. These are critical issues that we can get insight into how this man actually thinks and how he is going to adjudicate on the bench. This tells us who he is as an individual, yes, but more specifically, it tells us who he is with regard to some of the most critical issues of our day. We are literally engaged in those conflicts till today. And he was there in 2003 in a position of influence where he could have given some statements of substance that shine insight into who he is and how he thinks. And yet Chuck Grassley of the Republican Party doesn't think there's anything there. This is absurd. And of course, that is the talking point that is now being reverberated through their echo chamber all day long today, all day long going forward. They're going to say there's nothing there. There's nothing important. We have enough records to determine who he is. The fact of the matter is, in what way? I don't even have the words for it. In what way would any reasonable human being look at the time period in which we initiated generation-long wars, and this guy has had input into it? What reasonable human being would not be interested in it? You want to know who? Conservatives, Republicans, who are more interested in how they could win a fight. They're more interested in how they could win a Facebook argument than they are putting someone qualified on the bench. That's all this is about. All this is about is scoring points for their red team, for the red team. This is all they care about. And ultimately, the other side of that coin is not only do they just want to win Facebook arguments for their football team, the red team, they also want to make sure that they get anybody. They don't care how he rules on any other issue, so long as they get someone who would be a defining vote in overturning Roe versus Wade. And we have the opportunity to actually see what caliber of a person we're putting on the bench for the next 30 years. And all they care about is making sure that they can score some points for their side. This next story is fascinating from a constitutional rights perspective, but it's terrifying in the sense of the real life implications. Today, August 1st, was to begin the era of the printed gun. Cody Wilson of Texas started a company, and that company has provided blueprints to print out on a 3D printer a plastic gun that's capable of shooting actual bullets. They've printed guns all the way up to an AR-15, and they have successfully fired these weapons. Cody has been engaged in litigation with a lawsuit with the United States government in order to get these guns, or these blueprints rather, published on the internet so that everyone can download it themselves. Now, Mr. Wilson is championing this as a First Amendment issue, not so much a Second Amendment issue. He's saying that this has nothing really to do with the right to bear arms, but his right as an individual to disseminate information. Now, what other people do with this information, to him, it's irrelevant. He just wants to have the right to disseminate this information. During the Obama administration, they prevented it, and we'll discuss that in a minute. But now the Trump administration has said, yeah, fine. It's okay. Let's print what are called ghost guns. These guns are undetectable because they're made of plastic. They are untraceable because they have no serial number and have no way of being tracked back to any manufacturer because they're being printed in someone's garage with a 3D printer. And in an era of school shootings, I mean, this is a nightmare scenario. So simultaneously fascinating and terrifying because it really rests at the intersection of our competing rights. Cody Wilson's right to disseminate information, his First Amendment right, but then also our right to life, right? Liberty and the pursuit of happiness, that comes later. We just want to have the freedom to live. And he's giving and empowering people to print weapons to take our lives without any traceability, any accountability, and any mechanisms of detecting it. So he's putting our lives in danger. And so we have a question of competing rights of the highest order because we're dealing with actual lives. I want to pull up the first quote on your screen. This is from NBC News. They said a federal judge in Seattle issued a temporary restraining order Tuesday to stop the release of blueprints to make untraceable and undetectable 3D printed plastic guns, saying they could end up in the wrong hands. And I mean, I think that's the understatement. That's the understatement of the century, right? We're literally talking about the opportunity for criminals, not just past criminals, but aspiring criminals to get a hold of weapons that they don't even have to pay significant amount of money for, right? They don't have to have any background screens. They don't even have to go to the black market. Every person now can be their own black market and manufacture their own gun. And so, I mean, today was to begin this era, and the Seattle judge has now issued a stay to stop it. But it's far from over, right? This is just a temporary injunction, a restraining order to stop him from uploading these documents. Now, the last time he uploaded, in a single day, he got over 100,000 downloads to these blueprints. And these individuals, we don't know what percentage, but they have the ability to go out and print weapons. So there's the potential of thousands of guns already in existence that we cannot trace, that we cannot detect. And that was just from a single day of downloads. And just imagine what would happen if this is if he's given a free pass to disseminate this information at will. This is also another statement coming from the New York Times. The Obama administration had used export laws banning the foreign distribution of firearms to prevent publication of the blueprints. But an abrupt reversal by the State Department last month appeared to finally clear the path for Mr. Wilson to usher in what his website calls the age of the downloadable gun. So the Obama administration did what they could, right? The export law that says that you can't export sensitive military information, you can't export sensitive information like guns. They use that as a justification because as soon as this is on the internet, well, of course, it's not only downloadable here in the United States, it's downloadable abroad. And here's the issue. Here's the domestic issue. If gun rights, as we hear about them on an everyday basis, conservatives always frame this as a conversation not only about the Second Amendment, but also a states' rights issue, 10th Amendment issue. This giving someone in Texas, let's say Texas approves of it, and he uploads it in Texas, it doesn't matter what state rights or state laws say about it. As soon as it's uploaded, it violates the rights of every single state to determine whether or not they want this in their state. So now not only do we have an international issue, a violation of law, but we also have a violation of states' rights on a significant scale. And so I find little utility in pointing out the hypocrisy of Republicans because they're perfectly comfortable with their hypocrisy. It means almost nothing whatsoever for us to point it out, but we have to point it out. I mean, all day long you argue about states' rights, but here you're creating the perfect condition to directly violate the rights of every state to determine whether or not they want printable guns in their state. There's one more quote on the screen that I want to pull up for you now. Attorneys general in 8 states and the District of Columbia have filed a joint lawsuit attempting to force the Trump administration to prevent Mr. Wilson's nonprofit organization, Defense Distributed, from making the technical plans for the plastic guns available online for all the reasons that I just outlined. I mean, every single state is going to be on their heels, trying to keep up with laws that they didn't pass, keep up with situations that they did not create, that they did not manufacture, all because conservatives are more interested in expanding the rights to guns so far so that now you don't even have to go to a gun manufacturer for one. You simply can just print one in your basement, which means that you now no longer have any regulation, whatsoever, right? It's one thing for this to be considered a potential way of undermining gun manufacturers, which in my opinion is always a good thing. Anything we could do to hurt gun manufacturers who are hurting Americans, like people, you could take that soundbite all you want, but the fact of the matter is gun manufacturers are killing Americans. So if we do things to undermine them, I'm personally okay with that. But in reality, we're not undermining them in a way with this printable technology that's actually going to make Americans safer. We're undermining them in a way that's going to make us all the more at risk. This is what the president of the United States had to say about it on Twitter. He said, "I am looking into 3D plastic guns being sold to the public. Already spoke to the NRA. Doesn't seem to make much sense." Now, before you get this weird sensation that the president of the United States is actually on the right side of an issue, which is fine, it's possible. The reality of it is that he is more beholden to the NRA than he is concerned about the safety of Americans. Don't let that tweet fool you. He says in the first clause of the tweet, the A clause of the tweet, that he's going to check with the NRA. That means he's going to look to them for guidance on an issue that he and his administration should be able to sort out without the help of any special interest group. But instead of him figuring it out on his own with his staff, he's going and groveling at the feet of the NRA to see what they say about it. And again, I don't care what the NRA says about it, because ultimately, if they approve of this, it is damning to American people and it's detrimental to our safety. And if they don't approve of it, it's only because they want to protect the profits of gun manufacturers who are ultimately doing the same thing to us. Well, that's all I have to say about that.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am, of course, not David Pakman. I am Benjamin Dixon, host of the podcast, the sensational podcast, if I must say so myself, the Benjamin Dixon Show. You should go check it out. David will be back tomorrow. So, those of you who miss him, you'll be fine. He'll be back. He'll be back tomorrow. If you use Amazon, it's hard not to, because of how ubiquitous it is. Everything that you ever need that you can't find somewhere else, you can find on Amazon. But it really is getting to a point where that convenience that we all enjoy from Amazon is coming at a cost that should be too high, right? The item may be cheap, but the real cost of it in terms of human life and the treatment of their employees is obscenely high. There's a study that comes out that reveals, Guardian.com did an investigation. It reveals a pattern of Amazon refusing to file employees' workers' compensation and cutting off paid leave unexpectedly, and then pressuring employees to sign statements that they will not discuss this issue. They would not say anything negative or derogatory about Amazon in order to get paid. I mean, it's like extortion, but to keep you quiet about talking about the conditions that you're working under. So this is what the Guardian had to say. I want to pull up their quote on the screen for you now. A Guardian investigation has revealed numerous cases of Amazon workers suffering from workplace accidents or injuries in its gigantic warehouse system and being treated in ways that leave them homeless, unable to work, or bereft of income. The next quote says the following: over the course of a few weeks, Amazon medical triage area gave her, being the individual who was studied in this investigation, use of a heating pad to use on her back, while Amazon management sent her home each day without pay until the individual pushed for workers' compensation. And it gives you the story of a woman who's 49 years old who injured herself on the job. And while she was on the job, she attempted to continue working with this injury, but because she could not perform as quickly and as efficiently as she did without the injury, management began sending her home. So let me set the stage for you again. And then I want to go back to that second quote after I set the stage, because the second quote is better in context of what's actually happening in the story. You have a 49-year-old woman who got injured on the job at Amazon because of improper equipment. They did not have the right equipment in place in their warehouse. So she got injured because of Amazon. She continued to try to work at Amazon, but because she couldn't keep up with the efficiency goals of Amazon, Amazon management sent her home without work. Now, let's pull up that second tweet, that second quote one more time. Over the course of a few weeks, Amazon's medical triage area gave her use of a heating pad to use on her back, while Amazon management sent her home each day without pay until she pushed for workers' compensation. Let's go to the third quote. And to get the rest of the story, this is what The Guardian reported. She said, "I tried to work again, but I couldn't stretch my right arm out, and I'm right-handed. So I was having a hard time keeping up. This went on for about 3 weeks," Allen said. Despite not getting paid, Allen was spending her own money to drive 60 miles one way to the warehouse each day just to be sent home. And again, she was sent home because she could not keep up with the efficiency standards of Amazon, because she was injured at Amazon because of a faulty piece of equipment that Amazon did not have installed properly. This is not just the first story that we've heard about the obscene things that are happening at these Amazon warehouses. The cost of that dollar cheaper, I don't know, DVD, if you're even buying DVDs, you get it for $1 cheaper on Amazon. But now you see that cost has a real life cost and value that is taken out of these employees that work in these factories, that are afraid to use the bathroom, because if they go and use the bathroom, they'll miss their efficiency standards. And the fact that they just don't make a livable wage in the first place. Many of them are having to resort to living off of our safety nets because Amazon doesn't want to pay what they're paying. And this shows you that the Amazon is really in this. Of course they're in this. This is what for-profit businesses do. This is very similar to what made Walmart the giant that it is. Walmart didn't just become this giant corporation that's everywhere in this country simply because they got lower prices. They got lower prices because they beat their workers into submission, because they busted up any opportunity for unions to gather and form at Walmart. And it cost real lives. I mean, the standard of living, the ability to have some autonomy and some dignity in their work. And people take these jobs because they have no other choice but to take these jobs. They have to work for a living. And so they end up working at these sweatshops right here in the United States of America by the name of Walmart and by the name of Amazon. And all the while, while it may take a few $1 million to fix what's happening in any particular warehouse, that individual warehouse, Jeff Bezos, he's raking it in. I want to bring up this tweet on your screen so that you can just get an idea. The median Amazon employee's salary is $28,000. Jeff Bezos makes that much in 10 seconds. I mean, the disparity is atrocious. And yet this is celebrated in this American capitalistic system. Jeff Bezos is championed as a great symbol of American success, but that success comes directly as a result of draconian policies instituted by his mid-level management. And let me talk about mid-level management for a second, because these are the people who probably are making $50,000 a year, and because they're they came out of the working class. 50,000 is pretty close to the working class still. I can attest to that. But because they're making a little bit of money now, they are going to be some of the hardest taskmasters in this warehouse. So people who understand the working conditions of the proletariat, right? Now let's just use the language, right? The people who understand the real conditions are the very people who are the happiest to carry out the demands and the standards of people like Jeff Bezos. This doesn't work. Jeff Bezos does not become a billionaire without some accomplices in this. Right? The conditions in Amazon and Walmart, they don't happen just because of the Walton family and because of Bezos. No, they happen because you have a lot of willing accomplices who feel it is their duty to make sure that we carry out the efficiency standards to the T. Because if we carry it out, I can get a bonus. And because if I don't carry it out, there's a threat of me losing my job. Meanwhile, people making $28,000 a year injuring themselves and can't even work. They're not even able to make that $28,000 a year because they're being sent home by managers who say, I know you were injured on your job here. I know that we haven't really given you any means of fixing what we broke. We're not going to give you some disability. We're not going to give you any of that. But you need to go home, because if you're here trying to work for a living, then you're going to make us less efficient. And subsequently, people are going homeless because they can't make any money. That's the real price of Amazon Prime. According to President Trump, you need a picture ID to buy groceries. Any reason, I guess, to justify using voter ID laws to suppress voters. That's what the president of the United States is doing. In a rally yesterday in Florida, this is what the president of the United States had to say.
Which is why the time has come for voter ID, like everything else. Voter ID. You know, if you go out and you want to buy groceries, you need a picture on a card. You need ID. You go out and you want to buy anything, you need ID and you need your picture.
Now, early in today's show, we talked about the disconnect with reality that Donald Trump supporters have, right? And clearly, this is another example of it, because in what world do you have to go out and use an ID to buy it? The absurdity of it is pointless, pointing it out, right? There's, like I said, there's very little utility in pointing out how ridiculous conservatives have gotten. But the real purpose of this is to make the assumption that, or to make the claim that needing a voter ID to vote is as commonplace as going to the grocery store, when it's not. The underlying premise of voter ID laws really is voter suppression. Let's just be clear about that. I want to bring up a quote here to put it in context. Voting rights, and this is according to The Hill, voting rights groups have challenged a series of state voter ID laws, arguing that they are intended to suppress voter turnout among minority populations. Well, Republicans have fought for stronger voter ID laws, saying that they are necessary to prevent voter fraud. Now, we know that second part is completely untrue. Mike Turzai, former Republican leader of the Republican Party of Pennsylvania, made that clear all the way back in 2012 when he inadvertently let the world know exactly why they instituted voter ID laws.
Voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done.
I mean, don't take my word for it, from his own mouth. The whole purpose of voter ID laws is to help the Republican Party win and maintain political power. That's what it has always been. The Brennan Center has done extensive research in this, and you should look at their work. But I want to summarize their work with 3 statements from their website. This is what they say. Studies agree. Impersonation fraud by voters very rarely happens. Courts agree. Fraud by voters at the polls is nearly non-existent. Government investigations agree. Voter fraud is rare. Yet, the President of the United States and the Republican Party relentlessly attempt to institute voter ID laws across the country. Voter ID laws have a direct effect on minority populations participating in voting. That has been documented. Whether or not it has the ability to turn an election has yet to be determined, but we do know that it affects minority participation in voting. And Republicans know that when minorities vote, they generally vote for the Democratic Party. I wonder why that is. Take a look at your policies, perhaps. But instead of changing their policies, instead of doing anything to ameliorate the type of racism that exists both against black people and brown people with immigration policy, instead of changing any of that, they said, the solution here is to, well, since minorities don't like how racist we are, let's just make sure minorities can't vote. And the way you do that is making voter ID as ridiculous as, I don't know, going to the grocery store and having to show ID. And in that conflated statement that makes absolutely no sense is exactly where the Republican Party exists. That's where their thinking rests. And that is how they are going to get this passed across the country if we don't do something about it. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Pat over at the studio. Thanks to Max over at the studio. David will be back tomorrow. David, thanks for having me. And hopefully I'll see you all again. Take care.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.